All right, good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll get started. My name is Anthony Cave. I'm a digital producer with Harkin's Election SOS project. And first, before we get to our presenter, I'll show you all some of our resources beyond this webinar. So just give me a second here. Okay. So Election SOS, we have a ton of different resources and guides, story ideas, things you and your newsroom could use to find content, find story ideas, upcoming webinars we're doing. So that's all on electionsos.com/resources. And I could post this link in the chat as well. But wanted to transition over and introduce Ian with the Brennan Center for Justice. So he's going to talk about misinformation and what we probably will see a lot of over the next 20-something days. So take it away.
Thank you, and thanks to Election SOS. First of all, can anybody hear me? Just thumbs up. Okay. All right, so I am going to share my slides and get started. I'm going to just go through, and there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. I'm not going to use up anything close to the whole hour, so hold your questions or put them in the chat, I guess, as you think of them. I won't respond to them along the, in real time, but we'll go to questions at the end. Okay, so I'm going to share this. Go to slideshow, it doesn't want to do that. Huh. From beginning. Okay. Digital disinformation in the election is the topic here. Specifically, I'm going to focus on online voter suppression. So what we're going to look at, the main topics: election disinformation, some examples and what it looks like, how it works, who's already sort of fighting it, what are the sort of allies in the fight and the experts to look to, what election officials should be doing, what internet companies like Facebook and others should be doing, what everybody should be doing. And then at the end, I will share some resources for journalists that you may or may not already know about. So much of the content here is based on a report that we put out last month, which is called Digital Disinformation and Voter Suppression. All of the, you're going to get the slides, I'm told, and these links are live, so you'll have all of these links once that happens. So the problem of election disinformation, what are we looking at this year? So in the report, we have a bunch of examples from the primaries from Super Tuesday. So for example, warning that coronavirus is at the polls. So if you're over age 60, don't go to the polls. This was seen a lot, obviously a cynical use to try to get a specific demographic of voters staying away, maybe less effective now that vote by mail is sort of more of a thing than it was in the primaries. Of course, the typical vote on the wrong day. We saw robocalls on the primary day saying vote tomorrow. We saw tweets. There's a lot of these saying, Democrats vote on Wednesday, Republicans vote on Wednesday. That's sort of the classic thing. Frankly, a lot of those are jokes, but they can confuse people nonetheless. The platforms are all supposedly taking those down. Anything that's says how to vote in a way that's false. So vote by tweet, text this number to vote. The platforms should be taking all of those down, but they are frankly never successful in taking all of those things down. Another angle: on the day of an August primary in Florida, voters received text linking to a YouTube video. This was an actual video of the candidate that was sort of doctored to make it look like he was saying, "I'm dropping out, don't vote for me," on election day. And all of that was fake. Here's to get into a little more detail with an example. This is the image you're seeing on the right. There is was posted on Instagram as an image. It gets into there's some text with details. And these are the kinds of strategies you see. So this is presented as if it's helping voters, right? Here's how to vote. Make sure you're doing this. But actually, this is false. Voters don't have to do the things that they're saying in the message, and some things to look for. Also, it's an attack on a politician, right? So there's this grainy, bad, Newsom is a bad guy photo. It says recall Newsom. But, important detail is it's sort of made to imply that it's coming from the government, right? There's this Secretary of State.ca.gov web address. It's telling people to go to that web address and do something. So that's, faking that it's from the government. The intent here, not entirely clear. I'm speculating it's A, an attack on Newsom, and B, trying to sort of gum up the works of the Secretary of State's website, have a bunch of people go there and try to do something they don't need to do, which will just generally make things not work as well as it should. So taking a step back, what are the biggest kinds of election-related mis and disinformation that we've been seeing in 2020? This is an independent study by Signal Labs. All the things people are saying about the election, disinformation about vote by mail is by far the most common one. And notice that so the other things are sort of substantively about the election, presumably, is Kamala Harris eligible to be vice president? This is about how to vote. That's the biggest thing. And that people are spreading false information about. And of course, this is not just, bubbling up. This is driven from the top. President Trump is spreading disinformation about vote by mail regularly. And other allies of his allies in Washington are echoing that. So that's a big thing to look out for, is details about how to vote by mail. Is it inherently fraudulent somehow? Is it going to lead to election rigging? Lying about what the date you need to register by, what the date you need to get your thing in by, pictures of mailboxes on the back of a truck that are from 3 years ago. Those are the kinds of things we're seeing a lot of. Okay, so who is fighting disinformation already? Who are the allies that we can look to? Here's some people you may or may not know about that can weigh in on these things. So Election Protection is a very large coalition, civil rights groups and other groups, including the Brennan Center, that works on voter protection. They run a voter hotline, 866-OUR-VOTE, and other language versions that voters can always call to, I don't know if I'm registered, I don't know where my polling place is, anything like that. In addition to those services, they're also tracking voter suppression information on social media actively. And so they know things about what are the trends that we're seeing, like the things that I was just talking about, who's being targeted, generally communities of color, immigrant communities, young voters, student voters are disproportionately attacked by disinformation about how to vote. So, Election Protection is tracking those examples. They tend not to share actual examples because they're worried about amplifying bad guys and false messages, but they are certainly experts on what's going on tends to be from a kind of voting rights angle. Another, and as I said, these are live links. Another organization is the Election Integrity Partnership, which is another coalition. I think the main sort of part of it is at Stanford. Alex Stamos, who was head of security for Facebook before he sort of had a change of heart about whether Facebook was doing the right things on a lot of these things. They are actively, from a tech perspective, tracking disinformation for the purpose largely of presenting back to the platforms to say, look, here's some troll operation that you guys need to take down. And then the Online Ads Transparency Project at NYU, they're tracking political ads more generally, which is not the same thing as disinformation, but there obviously is a lot of disinformation in political ads, especially given policy like Facebook saying we will allow politicians to lie in our ads. So they have all kinds of information there that some of which you can look through directly on the website, and in terms of states and candidates and amounts of spending. That's a helpful resource. So another ally, of course, is the federal government. Congress is, from one perspective, not doing a lot, but the House did pass within Omnibus Democracy Reform Bill, H.R. 1. There's a bill within that called the Deceptive Practices and Voter Intimidation Prevention Act. Voter intimidation is already illegal, but this act would clarify what exactly are the practices tricking voters out of voting that are illegal, and what happens to you if you do those things. So that's helpful as a federal matter of federal law. The state laws about what's illegal in terms of tricking voters, lying to voters about how to vote, vary. So that is not enacted. It was passed by the House and has not been passed by the Senate, and is of course not going to be passed by the Senate before the end of this Congress. And then federal agencies, the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, are tracking disinformation threats and sharing that information with local officials. This brings us to the most important people in the world of election disinformation, our state and local election officials. Because, as you all know, elections are actually run by state and local officials in this country. We have 10,000 election jurisdictions, 10,000 different elections will be held, or already starting to be held, will be held through now in the beginning of November. So these are the most important people because they have the right answers, essentially, to counter disinformation. So what should they be doing? The bulk of the report that I linked to at the beginning discusses the best practices for election officials. And this is important for a number of reasons. Number one, they're the most important people in the space. From a reporter's perspective, I would want to know, is my local election official doing these best practices? If they're not, what are they doing instead? So the first sort of category of things that they should be doing is they should have written contingency plans. We're a little past this now that we're in October. And all these offices do have these plans and are checking these boxes. They should be establishing channels of communication with the public, including reporters and the media and the press, local press. Very important that when they get out this information, when they respond to disinformation, to not repeat falsehoods, and I will be repeating that over and over again. Don't repeat the lies, say the true information. And just a note from a reporter's perspective, from the opposite angle of election officials should know who to talk to in the press. The press should know who to talk to in the election official's office, right? If you got word that there was disinformation targeting your voters in your community right now, who would you call for the authoritative answer? Do you already know that name and phone number? You should figure that out ahead of time and contact them and say, hey, is there anything you want to tell people that we could do, know the right thing kind of piece ahead of time. Second category, publicize official sources of information to build public trust. So these days in our media environment and in quarantine, this is mostly online sources like websites and social media accounts. There's also obviously a message on the answering machine, paid ads in traditional media. So, but just having a social media account is not enough. That account should be active so that people are actually interacting with it, following it. It should be verified by the platform, right? They should have a blue check. And there's a responsibility on the platform also to offer those blue checks. So that's a thing to check. Are your local officials verified in that way? And if not, why? Is it the platform's fault? So again, from a reporter's perspective, do you know this information already? If a question comes up this afternoon, what website are you going to check first? What social media account are you going to look to? because some of these things can be faked. So hacking and spoofing can both allow bad actors to spread falsehoods that seem to come from officials. This is very real. We saw with the big Twitter hack recently, where a teenager in Florida allegedly, according to investigators, was able to get login information from Twitter, essentially by calling up and saying, "Hey, it's Joe from wherever. I forgot my login. Can you tell me?" And employees at Twitter gave out that information, apparently. This allowed the hackers to go in and make big name accounts say things that they wanted to say. In this case, they asked for Bitcoin, which is kind of a stupid scam, but similar kinds of methods. And you can imagine if Twitter could happen, somebody calling up your local county board of elections and saying, "Hey, I forgot my login for the official Twitter account. Can you give it to me?" Then they get control of the official Twitter account. They say whatever they want. They say the election's canceled. They say so-and-so won early on. We don't need to count any more ballots. These things that would eventually get figured out, but would cause chaos in the short term. So that's hacking on the one hand. And then spoofing on the other hand is when you just make a new account that you're trying to trick enough people because it looks similar enough, right? Instead of, Cobb County election officials, it's Cobb with 3 Bs. So it looks close enough that somebody might click on it and you can spread lies on that. So election officials should be watching out for these things. They should secure their accounts with the best cybersecurity practices. They should always be using .gov domains. Very few election officials actually do use .gov domains. It's a very simple, easy thing that everybody should be doing, and only about 20% of election officials nationwide are doing that. Have multi-factor authentication, have anti-phishing training, train people to not give out information on the phone. Don't click on links in your email. The same things the newsrooms should be doing, frankly, and other organizations. And then, of course, monitor for mimicked counts, check that search results. If somebody searches how to vote in Franklin County, what comes up? Is the number one result the official election official account, or is it some other thing that's trying to peel off internet traffic? And of course, they should monitor for disinformation, look on social media, hire companies that do social media monitoring to make sure they know what people are saying. Also, this is another case of being in contact with the community. Frequently, community groups, faith groups, community organizers know before officials what lies people are posting, or at least have questions about, well, I saw this online, is this real? And then, of course, work with platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and others to make sure that posts that do violate terms of service get taken down. So as I said, the major platforms all ban false information about how to vote. Right? Something that's actually saying, here's how to vote, and it's false, they all ban that, they'll all take it down. When you get to the broader issues of like voter fraud and we found a box of ballots in a ditch, some of those get more complicated, or at least the rules are less clear and the enforcement is often less clear, but the straight up deception about how to vote is typically violates the rules of service and will be taken down. And then finally, election officials should be building relationships with communities. I discussed this a little bit on the last slide. Including local and ethnic media. And again, there's a sort of the other side of the coin here is that media should know who those election officials are to ask the official answer from. Okay, so what should internet companies be doing? Social media companies, in this day and age, social media is more and more important. It's important for campaigning. It's important for news gathering. More and more people get their news on Facebook than from traditional sources every year. And then, of course, during quarantine, that's accelerated that even more because people are not going physical places anymore, at least not as much. So what we have now is the most powerful tools possible for people who want to trick voters about how to vote now exist. Obviously, people are motivated to do it. In 2016, we heard a lot about Russia's efforts to do this. This year, frankly, a lot more of it is coming from political operatives within the United States. And the sort of chaos and confusion around changed procedures due to COVID is also creating a new opportunity for people to generate even more confusion. So, what should internet companies do? They should proactively provide information about how to vote, right? Don't wait for people to be confused or lied to about how to vote, right? Tell every user and how to vote. And again, the big ones are doing this. Probably if you go on Instagram, you see at the top of the screen, are you registered? Here's how to register. Google is doing it. Facebook is doing it. That's good. Some of the smaller platforms are not doing it as much. Maintain clear channels for reporting disinformation. So what should a user do if they see a falsehood about how to vote? That should be crystal clear. How do you report disinformation that you, a Facebook user, are seeing? Right now, Facebook has, they all have, well, Facebook and Twitter both have, a report post, a little pull down that says voter disinformation. In Facebook's case, they have said, or at least the civil rights audit a few months ago said, that report doesn't actually go anywhere. You can flag something for disinformation and it's sort of collected and monitored in the aggregate, but they're not necessarily going to act on that. And that's another place where reporters are extremely helpful because Facebook will respond more to public pressure or public sort of acknowledgement that there's false information on their platforms. So an ordinary user saying, this is saying vote by text, that's false, is not necessarily going to get a response or a takedown from the platform. Of course, they should take down false information about how to vote. They should preserve the data because researchers are studying how do people use this disinformation, where is it coming from, how is it coordinated with other political actors in the system, and those are all important things to know in the longer term. They should help protect official accounts and websites. As I mentioned earlier, it's important for accounts to be verified so that this is the real Franklin County Board of Elections with that blue check. And some local election officials are having trouble with those kinds of procedures because the platforms sometimes have requirements like you have a certain number of followers before you're eligible for a blue check. And of course, the Franklin County Board of Elections doesn't have a huge number of followers. It's not, Ariana Grande or whatever. So states, the big platforms are trying to work on this. They're working with state secretaries of state or other officials who are reporting, here's our 67 counties. You should, let all of these people register. But that's another thing to check up on in your jurisdiction. And of course, the platform should be pushing specific corrected information to specific users affected by disinformation. In the past, Facebook, for example, said it couldn't do this, right? About the Russian interference in 2016, it said, we can't actually contact the people who saw these ads and tell them that they saw Russian ads. It's not possible. Whatever the truth or falsity of that, in the past, they have been doing this with COVID misinformation. They have said, if we find out somebody sees coronavirus-related misinformation, we will push corrective information to that specific user. So Facebook at least is saying that this is now possible, and they should be doing the same with voting disinformation. Okay, so just quickly, what can anybody do, right? This is a sort of what can I do types of content that is useful both to professionals like civil rights lawyers who are tracking this stuff, I think also to reporters to just have these checks in your head, and then of course to tell the public, anybody who's using social media, for example. So the first thing is consider the source, right? Where is this coming from? Is it a meme account? Is it a joke account? Is it satire? Is it The Onion or some lesser known version of The Onion? Is it an account that has been, that just pushes out politically motivated lies all the time? Or is it hard to even tell who the account is? That's a bad sign. Next, read the story, right? Don't just, like the headline or the whatever appears on the tweet is not the whole story, frequently is misleading. Click through, does the story actually say that? Next, and perhaps most importantly, which is sort of in some ways contrary to the second one, is look for other sources. Forget that story. Are other people saying the same thing? Are other people saying this has already been debunked? This is a hoax? What are reliable sources? This is called lateral reading, and it's in some ways the most important skill for social media literacy. Just put the post down, Google the thing, and see has somebody else already identified this as a hoax in their fact check. And then with how to vote specifically, of course, the ultimate authority is your local election officials. And so you should always contact them for the actual answer. Okay, so resources for journalists. So some of this is the same, but some of these are sort of specific to journalists. So this is, the most frequently made mistake in the world of disinformation is, people online say, and then saying the false thing in the headline. You know how many people only see the headline. So people only see the headline, and you say the false thing in the headline, that's what they hear. And that's what they take away, even if it says something like, has a question mark at the end, or it says there's propaganda circulating that. Don't ever say the myth in the headline. The headline is either people are lying, or some version of that, or it's the true thing. It's never the lie itself. If you are going to report or quote the lie, you use what they call truth sandwich, right? Start with the true information. Here's how you actually vote. Warn the reader or audience before you quote the lie. I'm about to tell you a lie, and here's why people are lying about this. They're trying to stop you from voting. And then again, end with the true information, or who the voters should contact to find out true information, right? Another thing specifically in the online context, never link to false posts or websites. Never retweet a disinformation post. Never share on Facebook a disinformation post. Never link directly in your online article to a disinformation post. That is the best thing you can do for the bad guys. Even if you're saying this is false, even if you're saying, I hate that these guys are saying falsehoods, you're still driving traffic to them. You're improving their impressions. That messes with the algorithms on Facebook and Twitter and makes them more likely to pop up in other people's feeds. You have to show what's happening, use a screenshot, post a screenshot that's not linked to the original content. Another thing, this has been huge in this election, old and mislabeled images are key disinformation tools. Use reverse image search. So in the past few weeks, we've seen all of these. Here's a bunch of mailboxes that are in a ditch. Here's a tray of mail that's in a ditch. These images are frequently from years and years ago. They don't include any ballots. Somebody will say, oh, these are all Trump ballots in a ditch. It's just a picture of mail, right? There's not even any proof that there's ballots in there, never mind ballots that are marked for Trump. How could anybody even know that unless they opened them all, right? So don't ever trust an image and the caption. Old images, mislabeled images are frequently lies. And then, of course, point people to the experts, whoever that is, with an interview, a link to the official website, or whatever is going to make sense in the context of your article. So again, these are live links. Once you get the slides, you'll be able to click through these. The first one is great. It's literally a little booklet that's just the kinds of things that I just said. Here's what to do, here's what not to do, here's how to do it, here's sort of resources about how to phrase things, how to do research. The second one is sort of a similar idea from the Poynter Institute. The Trusted Elections Network is actually a sort of a listserv community that's bringing together journalists, election experts, tech experts to all sort of talk about what are we seeing, what should we do about it. So that's a thing you can sign up for. And then obviously there are a lot of fact-checking sources, but Fact Chat is a relatively new one that is available in both English and Spanish. And sort of, it's a WhatsApp chat bot that kind of aggregates a lot of fact-checking content. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, stop the share, so I can see the chat. So that's available for, I'm going to start answering questions in the chat now. So if you haven't gotten your question in the chat, put it in. If you want me to go back to one of the slides, I'll be happy to do that. Put that in the chat also. So first thing we have here, should we also explain in a story why we are only posting to images of misinformation instead of linking directly? I think so, I mean, from my perspective, it's always good to say why you're doing something like that. I do think it's very natural for the reader to think, I want to see for myself, why aren't you linking? And I think it's increasingly become a practice on Twitter for people to screenshot and say, I'm not going to link to these people, but here's what they're saying. So I do think that's a useful, sort of behind the scenes thing to explain why you're not doing this obvious thing, because frequently it is useful, obviously, to link to sources, but you just don't want to drive traffic to these misinformers. Okay, so next question, what is the best protocol when you accidentally spread misinformation? That is a great question, right? Obviously, the journalist has the mechanism of the correction, and there are sort of, ethics rules around that. And obviously, everybody knows the problem with the correction is that nobody sees the correction. I think it's actually sort of easier in the online world because you have an online article, that's a dynamic document, you can always change it, and with a note that it's been changed because in the world of social media, you can post a correction or a new story. Again, that has the problem that if the mistake goes viral and the correction doesn't, there's unfortunately not a lot you can do about that. I mean, I think this is one of the reasons I always tell election officials that social media practices are very important, because they frequently complain somebody posts a fake tweet and it gets, 10,000 shares or retweets, and I post the true thing and I get 100 retweets. So to some extent, it's driven by a lot of factors. People like outrage. The algorithm on Twitter is designed to reward things that are already going viral. But some of it is those social media practices of the election officials themselves, because they don't chase followers the way the bad guys do. The bad guys are always doing stuff. They interact with celebrities. They, buy ads. They buy Twitter. You can buy Twitter followers. They do all these things to boost their follower counts, and those things help them spread misinformation. And the good guys don't necessarily do all those things. I'm not saying election officials should buy Twitter followers, but interacting with celebrities, interacting with journalists in the community who do have high counts, buying promoted posts, ads, essentially. These are all good practices to get those follower accounts up, which, again, you're never going to match what the bad guys are doing because they're doing shady stuff, but at least have a fighting chance. So for the web, should the correction be at the top of the article? I don't actually have an opinion about that. I think if you correct it in where it appears in the article and then have a note of correction either at the top or the bottom, those seem equally acceptable to me. I think the important thing is that you're conveying the information to the user. Obviously, people go back to online articles, into the future, we don't know how far into the future someone will still be looking at that. So just as long as it's obvious to the reader is, I think, what I would emphasize. Any data or studies showing whether, even in a truth sandwich, it's the false information that sticks with the reader, listener, or viewer? So I am not a cognitive psychologist, but my understanding is that this is a little contested. So there was a sort of swing in conventional wisdom a few years ago about the backfire effect, and telling people that something they heard is false actually makes them more likely to think it's true. And more recently, there's been a sort of backfire to the backfire effect. I don't, obviously I'm not an expert specifically in that, but it's my understanding that people are able to process information about something they're told being false, and that new information is good. The most, I think, as journalists know, people respond to stories. So simply saying this thing that you heard is false, especially in a world where partisan allegiances affect people's sort of willingness to accept new information sometimes. So just telling somebody this thing you thought you knew was false is not always helpful. Not that it's harmful, but that it's not going to be helpful. But telling people a story about this person is lying to you, and here's why they're lying to you, here's why they want you to think these false things, it has been shown to be more effective at dislodging false beliefs. I think in the situation, right, so there are different situations to think about. One is your reader has already seen the disinformation and you're trying to disabuse them of that. In that case, yes, it's important to say, this lie is out there, here's why it exists, and here's what the truth is. The other case, and this is the amplification concern, is the reader has not heard the disinformation. The reader is a blank slate on the issue. And you, by reporting on the disinformation, are providing them with that falsehood. Again, there, it's very important to warn that, I'm about to tell you a falsehood, right? People are saying this thing that's not true before you say the thing. Something else I was going to say, which has now lost me. I mean, I guess bottom line is you never know what's going to stick, but repetition is hugely important to spreading both true and false information, which is one of the ways that social media is bad for truth spreading, because the bad guys know that repetition is key, and they just post the same thing thousands and thousands of times. But that's a tool that's also available to truth tellers, in that repeating something within one article, right? Literally saying the true thing first, and say whatever other details, the true thing again, right? So it's the first and last thing, and there's some repetition in there, is helpful. In cases where you know that misinformation is spreading in your community, again, the bad guys are posting this on Twitter 40 times in a day. It may, your social media manager may not like it, but you posting the true information 40 times in a day would be an appropriate response to that. Again, if you know that some specific thing is happening in your community, like in California, these posts saying everybody's been registered to vote by mail, you have to go and re-register, right? That's live disinformation that's being spread currently in California. If I were a California news outlet, I would think it would be totally appropriate to run, on my social media feed every day. You don't have to go and re-register. Your registration is still valid. Again, I'm speaking extemporaneously, making sure that whatever you're saying is true by checking with the Secretary of State and others. Other questions?
Looks like that might be it. All right. Well, I would like to thank everyone for their time. I know it's a busy news cycle, relentless news cycle we're going through right now. Election House will have the slides posted soon, as well as the recording of this video if you missed anything. Yeah, and thanks everyone for their time, and yeah.
Yeah, thank you.